So we're going to talk to you today briefly about something that we've termed Lib Static. And as the name implies, Lib Static is really this concept of applying static web technologies to digital library needs, the digital library ecosystem in a practical and sustainable way. So outside of libraries, since about 2015, this approach of using JavaScript, APIs, and markup, or what's called a Jamstack approach, has been combined with static web technology. And you know the Jekyll static web generator now. There's Gatsby, there's Hugo, there's a lot of other ones too. And this sort of approach to web development has become increasingly popular and reduced the needs or reliance on databases, content management systems, or more complex server applications. So as you know now, since you've learned CollectionBuilder, the static web tools are pre-rendering a site's page in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files that enable you to deliver your content more efficiently and securely to users than the dynamically generated sites do. That are relying on server-side processing to render their pages. And so we've been able to kind of learn this approach and meld it into our approach to library projects, including, as Devin kind of started showing yesterday, our digital scholarship projects, our digital collections, and even our main library website, as well as many other sites and projects that we've worked on. And along the way, we've sort of started to develop and realize and appreciate the type of power and I think opportunity that this approach holds, not only in its minimal infrastructure and open source nature, but also in its ability to allow us to focus as much on the design of the tools that we're using to present our information, allowing us to think about the platforms and the control we have over them, as much as we think about the curation of that information and the curation of the data that goes into that is what we are disseminating with them. And so this is important since for so many years, our library and other libraries have had to sort of grapple with, complex infrastructure, extensive IT staffing, third-party vendors that were always used in the past to make that same information available. So we've sort of distilled Lib Static into these 4 principles here, and I'll just kind of go through each one and talk about how the development styles fall into these categories. So the first is open, and we mean open source code, public documentation to facilitate, learning and sharing with that code. We're also encouraging, or these types of tools and this development style should be encouraging reuse, so that the skills that you spend time learning for one project or one platform can then be applied to other projects and platforms, and those are transferable skills too. They're not just directly related to that one platform. And collaborative development is also a big part of this, that collaborative development within your own institution, but also across institutions and across contexts, to really allow for tools that are flexible and easily manipulated to fit a variety of use cases. The next point here is simple-ish, and we say we have the ish there because, as you know, now there's a pretty high steep learning curve right at first as you're getting familiar with the static web technologies and the way that it's working and getting the software downloaded. And so there is an investment there at the beginning, but once you get started, once you have that foundation, this approach really lowers the barriers to development in the future. So part of that is because the code is not hidden behind that GUI interface that Evan demonstrated a few days ago. But the other part of it is that the development process is iterative. So we're always building on and improving on what we've done. And in that way, you can sort of gain these development skills gradually over time as you work more with the projects. The other thing that makes it more simple is that there's no dynamic web server or database or content management system needed, so it's more cost effective. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also more secure, and we think better suited to the academic digital library or digital scholarship environment, where we're working usually really intensely for a few months or a year on a project, and then it just and then after that there's very low maintenance on it. It just sits for a long time. We don't have the resources to maintain that in as intense a fashion as we created it. The next point is library optimized. So we this development style makes we want full control over the content and a clear defining of the data versus the platform's code. So in the case of CollectionBuilder, and I think other platforms as well, we're putting an emphasis on preparing that data outside of the tool itself to make it more easily preservable. And that's an important part of this approach too. We also went agency over the systems that we're using. So we're leveraging the skills that we already have, that as information professionals, but also as humanists and digital humanists, we have skills in data and information organization. And the Lib Static approach really encourages developing and creating tools that value these skills rather than just kind of glossing over them and making use of those skills. The last point here is user-focused. This means user-focused on the front end. So just as CollectionBuilder does, using data in multiple ways to generate visualizations and contextual information. There are other static web platforms out there that we'll look at in a little bit here that do that same thing from a spreadsheet, just as CollectionBuilder does. But we're also remembering and anticipating users' future needs, their research needs, by making data open source, easily downloadable, and available in a variety of formats as well. But I think we're also user focused on the side of the creator. So thinking of us as the creators of these projects is important too, as project designers, as developers, as project managers. We should really be focusing more on the question of, like Alex Gill says in the reading we looked at last night, that question of what do we need and what are the basic building blocks that we need to complete the project in front of us in a way that is both sustainable and manageable within the academic environment. So within the Lib Static methodology, we get to decide what we need for ourselves rather than adapting our project to fit the predetermined options or the platforms that are popular or available at the time. So I think all of this adds up to really recognizing and valuing our own knowledge as information professionals, as humanists, and combining it with our technical knowledge to make these tools really work for us, to be designed by us and used by us. There's a couple other points that I wanted to make more present here too, not just the four that I just mentioned, but I wanted to also highlight that the Lib Static approach also encourages tools that are migration and preservation ready, or projects that have that sort of thinking embedded in them. So migration, we know, is inevitable from our own experience. I know from your experience too. No system that you're going to use is permanent. The trends in digital libraries and digital scholarship are changing over time. So rather than putting all of your time into learning a new system, if we can really invest time on focusing on the data, creating quality metadata, creating digital objects that are ready for preservation, then that will make the inevitable migration process less painful in the future. And it's a good use of time to invest in that and not spend all your time learning a new database, the inner workings of a new database. The code is also preservation ready. So it's not going to stop working in most cases, like a lot of digital humanities sites have in the past that we've seen. But you can also take, those flat files and store them in your digital archives as well. So there's this focus on preservation that I think runs through a lot of projects, including CollectionBuilder, but other DH static web projects as well. And then there's this mindset too of education and teaching and learning. And as you have discovered, there's this steeper learning curve at first, and certainly the static web approach is not the answer 100% of the time for all of the projects out there. But when it is appropriate, an investment in learning it and learning the style, I think, will pay off. So we're recognizing that there's opportunity costs in librarians or digital humanists only learning to be experts in a specific database, because that database or whatever the learning system, the content management system, might not be supported in 3 years. But if they spent time learning some basic HTML, Markdown, or data manipulation, or if they already had those skills and we're just building on them, that would be a better use of that really deep learning period of time. There's also, I think in the readings last night, both of them sort of make the point that the user-friendly technology that is very popular, or the user-friendly platforms that have been so popular for the past 10 years are distancing people from their tools and from the inner workings of how computers work, of how data works. And we're not saying that we all need to become computer programmers, but if there is a way for us to start small, to learn slowly and build on what we learn, and I think that CollectionBuilder really especially seeks to address this type of learning style and is evolving to address this learning style, then there is value in becoming more informed of the way that the systems we use are working. There's no harm in that, for sure. The last thing, or not the last thing, but the next thing I want to talk about is that Lib Static is more than a methodology. So I've been sort of laying out these tenets of it, but it's also a community, and that's what we are trying to build right now by educating people with CollectionBuilder, and then trying to expand the ways that we as humanists and information professionals can work with these tools. So it's a community that shares code and ideas and resources for learning, and that's what we mean by cookbook too. And I'll kind of talk about our ideas of recipes, code as recipes, in a second here. But this idea of community also stems from this broader definition of minimal computing, which you were introduced to in the reading for today. It's both a computing practice that's enacted under, constraints, but it's also a critical movement. Minimal computing is that I think seeks to apply this sort of approach of what it is, what do you need to complete your project, to a number of broader social contexts as well. And so we're hoping that Lib Static will become a valuable part of this sort of larger community of minimal computing, with a very specific focus on digital library tools and digital humanities tools particularly. So there are other prominent projects out there that now that you have this basic knowledge after becoming familiar with CollectionBuilder, you can jump out and use and explore, and maybe even take parts of them and use to build your own projects in the future. So this one is Ed. It's a minimal platform for creating and teaching with digital editions. I think I can jump out here and just kind of show you around. Can you still see my screen? Okay. And so it has an easy way to create your own digital edition with minimal, and also kind of learn a little bit about how the static site is working at the same time. But you can do it for free and easily teach students to use this kind of style as well. And the next one I wanted to highlight here is Wax, which is another digital collection platform that puts a lot of emphasis, especially on high quality images. So if I go to browse here, I can take a look at an image and really kind of delve into that image, see the image's metadata, and look at example exhibits as well. And then the last one I'll take a look at is our oral history as data, which is created out of the University of Idaho. And just is using, taking oral history transcripts, turning them into CSVs, and then using that data then from the CSVs to create new ways of visualizing and exploring transcripts and interviews. So here's a subject visualization of a transcript where you can see all of the subjects in one color there. You can also listen to the interview while reading through it in this structured way as well. And then this gets to this idea of recipes too. So here's this visualization with the color coding in oral history as data, but we also have it, we were able to use that visualization in two other oral history projects, the first being this Voices of Gay Rodeo project, which is a digital scholarship project and has a very distinct look to the way that it's presented and set up. But the second being more of a digital collection of oral histories called Idaho Queered, that is a kind of a combination, as you can tell here from the browse page, of CollectionBuilder and oral history as data. So this is what we're meaning when we're saying we're combining code. So you can see this oral history transcript looks the same as this one in oral history as data, but when I go to the browse page, that's a very distinct CollectionBuilder look. So this kind of expands on what Devin was getting at yesterday too, when I'm using the same example. We're using this CollectionBuilder code for a browse in our library's website for browsing digital collections as well, for browsing special collections, sorry. So that is kind of what that's what we're hoping to kind of facilitate and encourage, with Lib Static being sort of a gathering place, a community for these recipes to get incorporated into various projects, depending on what visualizations, what features that you eventually want to have in your collection or your project, so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. It's hopefully an easy way for you to kind of jump in and see what other people have done and get to use that, incorporate that yourself. And then I have this conclusion here. Last night you read the article, The User, the Learner, and the Machines We Make, which emphasizes, I think, this important shared goal among humanists to renew and disseminate and preserve information. But I think Lib Static lets us take that concept one step farther, and it allows us to incorporate the tools, like the actual tools themselves, into the arguments that we're making with that information, and the ways that we're presenting that information. So I was wishing that we had you read this article as well, or this blog post by Bethany Novisky, but you are welcome to go to it if you would like to, because she really gets to this point too, when she's saying that this is the idea that we should think about in cultural heritage work today, that that people should be able to not just access their own content in archival and library systems, but and not just be able to control access to it, but to set the terms for the infrastructure itself, actively configuring classification systems, search and discovery interfaces, and visualization tools in our shared digital libraries to express these independent theories of the world as it is for them and the world as it should be. So I think that by encouraging and building this community around this type of thought, that the argument we're making, the presentation that we're making, is as much in the tool itself as it is in in the content, and that we should have control over both, Lib Static is hopefully getting to getting us one step closer to this goal of having some control over the way that we're, publishing the content, the way that we are interacting with our projects and thinking of our projects within the digital library and digital scholarship worlds. So we encourage you to keep in contact if you're really interested in this approach. We're in the process of redoing our website this summer, and we hope to have get a start on not only featuring the projects that are out there that are available and open for you to jump into, but also having those code parts that we're hoping to make available that you could grab and use in your own digital humanities projects in the future. So definitely stay tuned for more, and let us know if you have any questions.
I just wanted to interject one other area that kind of, because we're kind of talking about digital collections, we kind of skipped over here, but another really great application for static web stuff is open educational resources. And so we've had a number of projects for that. We've built a textbook with a music professor. I'll put that in the chat. And also just really simple kind of templates. I started building all of my workshops, rather than creating slides, just creating a little website. And so that kind of inspired by data carpentry and software carpentry, where people can work on GitHub to collaboratively develop teaching materials. And then because I kind of set up this template, there's a number of other folks, a lot of people in our library, but also people around the world that just randomly also come across this and start using this template as a way to create workshop sites. And so the nice thing there is, just like the rest of the static web stuff, here's an example of one in the chat, that it ends up being very reusable. And so it's a really ideal kind of platform for OER, where you can set up some content and some templates, and then people can reuse it and remix it in lots of different ways. So I just want to throw that one in there as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I just used one of those the other day. It's easy. And now you can use them too, because you know how all these work, and they work the same way. All this stuff works the same way. So you just fill it in and replace what's there, and you've got your own thing.
The other thing that I think Devin and I have found over, and Olivia, but as we've started out working on this, one of the things that you discover is that, in a lot of projects, the typical like DH project model was, you get this grant, you do a bunch of work on the data and writing context and stuff, and then you hire a contractor that builds the website after the fact. And it's sort of like an add-on to the project. Whereas if you work in this way, where you're kind of integrating that work, project work on the data directly with the project work of the website, then the website becomes integrated part of that research process. And you can use it to be thinking through your materials and your relationships to that context, or their relationship in the context. And also you end up using that web as a part of a tool in that research process, where you're discovering more about your materials and then using that to build a better website over time. And so we've really gone into, like, I'm going to set up this base of a collection builder, and then I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting feature of this data and these objects and this metadata that I put in here, and then going and discovering that maybe I should build this other feature so that I can bring that out, and you learn more about it. I think really with oral history of data as data, the first project that Devin put together that kind of formed the framework for that, that was really the process of there's all of this transcripts and information, and you have to get it into somewhere so that you can start analyzing it. And so the tool itself is both publishing and an analytical tool for the researcher that's creating it. Do we have that link in there?
Yeah, I'll put that in. So that's, thanks. Yeah, Control Shift is the project that kind of led to oral history as data, and then integrated into Voices of Gay Radio and the Idaho Queer Oral History Project. But that was just, I did a bunch of interviews of prominent poets in 2013, 2014. So it's been a while, some of whom were my teachers. And then, I was like, well, I could write like a article about this and put it somewhere and it'd be done. Or I can make a project that lasts for the rest of my life. And I didn't know I was choosing the latter. But no, I think we're finalizing it this summer. But it is something that you kind of learn from, and you expand out from, and kind of go from there. I mean, I think we all have projects like that. I mean, and that's been kind of an interesting part of this too, is like we start these projects and learn a lot from them. Olivia, you didn't talk about your letters of Marie Mancini at all either. I'm going to put that link, the development site, in here. It's not finished yet, but I know she's gone through a number of different iterations there using XML and TEI kind of components too. So Olivia, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think this is a project that's been able to combine a lot of different technologies. We've encoded the letters using TEI because that's what is standard across DH projects. But we've used Ruby to transform those into HTML for the web here. And we put a really big emphasis on being able to read the text in different version, the transcribed version, the edited transcribed version, as well as the translation. And now I've been working on incorporating IIIF into the image viewer, or using looking at OpenSeaDragon, which is actually what Wax uses. So I've been looking really closely at the way that Wax is set up, and that's not on this. I've been doing that on a different branch, so you can't see that right now. But yeah, so I've been drawing from a lot of different other projects and compiling that to build this site. And like it uses a lot of CollectionBuilder aspects, such as the map and the timeline are similar, but those are potentially going to be expanded upon too as the project develops. It does take a long time to transcribe and translate those letters, and so it's a big operation with about 3 or 4 different people working on it at any given time.
Yeah, I think we can talk about this in the show and tell era too, is like the like importance of deadlines and sunsetting projects too. And like, the whole kind of point behind a lot of this development is so that they, can kind of be encapsulated and preserved. But if you never end your projects, I think that's a sort of human resources problem a lot of times in our library. It's just like, oh, right, that project that we've been doing for forever. So, yeah, so I think it's, giving yourself deadlines or thinking about it in terms of kind of a finished publication is also sort of necessary project management tool too, sort of socio-tech. But are there any questions or stuff before we kind of move to the show and tell portion, or is there anything else, Olivia or Evan, you wanted to add? In the outline, it says good digital humanist steel, and I hope folks, well, maybe you get the reference, but it's from T.S. Eliot used to say, I just looked this up today. It's like immature poets borrow and mature poets steal. And so I think it's kind of like once you're starting to move forward in a field, then you can start to say, oh, I like that, and then just steal the look and steal the. And now we're like kind of, I think Lib Static is all about kind of making the code easy to steal, right, or borrow or reuse is I think our sort of way we express it now. But anyway, I think that's an important part of learning and moving forward with this stuff too. So.
Well, one thing I'd like to show really quick is that as you move through the week, you are making a bunch of commits on GitHub, and so all of that is here. It's working in the open, and so it's kind of cool and interesting to be able to see the history from where you started, each of these commits and the different people that did it, and the description of what they did. And then if you go over here to this Insights tab and click on there, and you can go to this contributors, and you can start to see your work on the project in a quantified data way, which can be really interesting once you get onto a bigger project and over a long period of time. And so I think that kind of quantification of your work in this weird way is really interesting for us humanists who don't necessarily see that in a very regular basis for their work.
Yeah,
but it's pretty interesting.
Put a bunch of that in his tenure packet. Evan will receive tenure in March and will be an associate professor in July. So congratulations, Evan.
Thanks.
but it was a really interesting packet in that, you know, he was able to use a lot of the data that he gathered from GitHub and from the people's relationships and sort of interactions with his code and with his projects to make the case of, you know, significant impact, which is the first time we've really seen it here. And I think, you know, Olivia will do it too. And I think I will be doing it maybe this summer a little bit. So we will see. So yeah, Olivia.
Should I stop the recording so we can jump in?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.